today's topic is communication planning with OpenAir, and this is really about all the emails that can come out of OpenAir, which ones to consider, which ones to consider turning off, which ones are effective, and some recommendations from us. If you haven't been to our webinars before, the way we work it is we present the material first, so all the lines are muted, and then we will leave time at the end for questions. They can be about this webinar or anything in general. We cut those from the final production version that we post to the website, so you can always listen back to the webinar and not worry about any questions that you're asking being broadcast out to everyone. So I've already confirmed that you guys can hear me and you can see me, so we will get started on this topic. So the communication plan with OpenAir, what we're going to talk about is what are the goals in having a system like an OpenAir system communicate out to people. And there's a lot of different ways that OpenAir can communicate, and a lot of different intentions of what the communication is about. Things like alerts, just notifications of actions that have been taken, maybe even information like reports coming out of the system. And then we have some suggestions about approaches that you are welcome to consider as you work with the tool yourselves. So what's the goal of communication, right? It's to keep people informed or to have people take action on something that's required. It's a way to confirm that an action has been taken. Those are all things that you've seen come out of OpenAir if you're an OpenAir user. A timesheet requires an approval. Your timesheet has been approved. Those are action and confirmation trade-off emails. Things about reports coming out, maybe your missing timesheet report coming out Monday morning. That's a piece of knowledge and information delivery that does drive some action, but also serves to be a process compliance. So the emails that come out of OpenAir should have a purpose. It's really the goal of the communication plan with OpenAir. And a lot of times when the system is implemented, it's sort of like, well, whatever comes out comes out. And there's some consideration about additional emails to turn on, but there's a standard set that are allowed, and even those can be reviewed to see which ones can be turned on and turned off. So this is a slide that I really like to show everyone. Do you realize in a day how many emails can actually be sent out of OpenAir? So as we sit here and talk, as I'm popping up all of these different emails, you're probably shaking your head or nodding your head saying, yep, we pretty much get 50, 60, 70, 80%, maybe all of these kind of emails. And there's just lots and lots of email types of communication that can come out of OpenAir. Alerts, approval requirements, confirmations, updates, reports. So you can kind of get a bit overwhelmed. And what you don't want to happen is that everyone learns how to do an inbox rule on their Outlook or their Gmail to route anything that comes from OpenAir.com into the trash bucket, because then that sort of removes the effectiveness of the communication. So we're going to kind of highlight some buckets or categories of the types of emails that can come out of OpenAir and make some suggestions for you guys to consider within even your day-to-day use of the tool. So alerts, this is the most basic type of notification. Something needs to happen, okay? And the main intent of an alert is that action is required, right? So what are the alerts that you guys know about? They're the late timesheet alert, right? That's the one that's probably most commonly used in the system. Your timesheet's overdue, make sure you get it in, compliance message, that kind of thing. Overdue timesheet approvals, overdue expense approvals, those are all alerts that are often available. There are budget alerts available in the tool that some of your project managers may desire or have been thinking about wanting to use in the tool. There's some pros and cons on that feature. And there is actually a resource utilization alert. There is a specific situation that it would be useful, so we'll kind of cover that as well. The late timesheet alerts. So I can pop into OpenAir and show you guys where these are. I'll just kind of talk about them first. The late timesheet alerts, definitely very much a do in the system. You want to remind your folks that they need to get their timesheets in. Almost everyone that has an OpenAir system does require timesheets from some part of the population, and there are controls in the system obviously to be able to identify who those people are so that they are the only ones that get the alert. So the late timesheet alerts, the standard message that comes out is, hey, it doesn't say, hey, your timesheet, but it says, the timesheet is overdue. Please submit as soon as possible. I think that's some of the standard wording that comes in there. Consider making that message a little bit more informative. Some other things that I suggest, especially for people who are new to the company, who may get that message and not really know what to do or where to go with that message. You can record your timesheet training and put that as a hyperlink in that timesheet alert. So when they do get that overdue notice, it's just a one-click action for them to actually take that training and learn how to do the timesheet entry. So make the content of the email about the late timesheet more than just about the fact that it's a late timesheet. Maybe a reminder about the policy. You can actually change who the from address is, so you can pretend that it's coming from someone high up in the organization. People may figure out that it's actually just a standard email that comes out of OpenAir eventually. But there's ways that you can control the content of that timesheet alert and make it an important email. Now the other thing is, for those of you who have more than one office in multiple time zones or multiple countries, something that's really important if I think about the late timesheet is making sure that the alert comes out at the right time according to time zones. So even in the US we have 4 time zones to consider. So hey, your timesheet is late message at noon on East Coast is 9 o'clock on West Coast, and that may not be the policy. The policy may be noon. So those tend to start getting ignored by the West Coast and they lose their impact. Just something simple like a way to sort of identify whether those people are in certain departments, maybe some way to group them by username. All those are configuration controls in the late timesheet alert so that the right people get the right alert at the right time according to time zones. Another thing is you can have more than one late timesheet alert. The late timesheet, there's usually typically one, right? It's Monday morning or maybe it's Sunday night, you get your timesheet in. I have seen a number of customers take a proactive approach where they're sending it automatically Friday night as a reminder, hey, make sure you get your timesheet in. So it's a proactive message versus a reactive message. And then you'll send it again maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. You can send multiple versions of the same timesheet alert. You just have to set up more alerts in the system. Avoid setting up too many because then people will start ignoring them obviously. So there's a fine line there. And I generally see like 3 notices about timesheet alerts adopted by many customers. If you send a generic message to everyone, it's not going to be very effective. They're like, yeah, I know, I got to get my timesheet in. And the time zones may be a challenge as well. So there is a lot, even though this is a very simple alert in the tool, there's a lot of control that you can have and impact you can have with this message. The timesheet alert is actually in the Timesheets module. If you have permissions, you'll see it in the alerts option here. And then you can create your late timesheet alerts, and you can create as many as you need to. New late timesheet alert. If you're an administrator, you can see all the timesheet alerts. If you are not an administrator but you have the ability to create an alert, you'll only see the ones that you create, by the way, in the system. Okay. So what's the other type of timesheet and expense related alerts? These are the overdue timesheet alerts, the overdue expense alerts. And these are ones that are triggered based on the fact that something has been submitted, so it's in a submitted state. And because it's in a submitted state, it needs action taken from someone. So these alerts react to the fact that the timesheet or the expense already is in the submitted state. And then it will send a reminder to the approver. So it knows, of course, who the approver is because that's how the whole routing thing goes. This one I would typically send from a fictitious email like do not reply at blah blah blah.com, just so that people remind themselves, oh yeah, I forgot to go back and update the approvals. There's, in the new system, in the new UI that came out a couple of years ago with the reminders tile, people are not always logging into OpenAir and checking to see, do I have something that I have to do. So it's easy to delete an email. It's easy to forget that a reminder came in that you have to approve it. So setting up a couple of these overdue approval alerts will be very helpful to your folks to kind of keep on top of the fact that they have to get the timesheets and expenses approved, because that could be holding up billing, especially at month or quarter end. Another type of alert that's on the projects module is actually a budget alert. Now, the thing about the budget alert is you can actually have project managers take ownership and do a budget alert themselves. They can actually, it's permission that you can give them in their role to be able to create their own alert so that they can actually make an alert per project if they want to. That the configuration of the budget alert allows an individual project identification if you want to, or project stage identification, or project manager identification. But really the effectiveness of the budget alert is to proactively alert the PM when a certain burn threshold has been hit. Now, the consequence of using the budget alert is that it only deals on actuals, like actual charges or approved hours. And in some of those cases, you really want to see more like in work. What's the timesheet that's in work, worked hours type thing. The alert itself focuses more on charges and processing of approvals. So you have to set a lower threshold than you normally would if you wanted to use a budget alert, because I know as a PM myself, I always want to get alerted when I'm hitting 80, 85, maybe 90% of the burn, but that's before it's been fully approved so I can understand what I need to do for adjustments. With the budget alert functionality in OpenAir, I tend to drop that threshold down to be like 65, 70, 75%, so that the fact that all of that has been locked and approved as actuals against the project, now I have some wiggle room to kind of watch closer on the working efforts that are going on inside the project. So I'm going to go bring up the alert and you'll see what I mean as I'm trying to describe it. So it's another projects module. And you can have as many budget alerts as you want. Of course, it's just like any other alert in the system where you have to tell it when does it run, when does it trigger in the system. But you'll notice that some of the controls are when you have approved hours reaching a certain percentage of the budget hours, so you have to use the budget hours on the project. Or you have a total number of charges reading a percentage of the budget money, right? So we're dealing with approved hours or completely billed billing rule charges. So these two right here bringing that whole actuals view into play, and that's where you tend to have to push the threshold down a little bit if you want the alert to really be effective. Getting an alert that you've reached 90% of invoicing already on a project that may only be halfway done is a little bit too late in the pipeline. I think everyone would agree with that. So you have to sort of selectively identify what threshold will work better for your PMs. But you can actually pick individual projects to send it to have it monitor individual project stages, individual project owners. Those are the project managers that you name on the project. So all of that can be considered in the alert, and of course, just like many of the rules, you can exclude certain types of charges so that maybe the expenses are all reimbursed as billed, so you don't have to worry about an expense budget as an example. So this budget alert is useful, but the caution that I tell folks that are considering it from a project management perspective is just think in terms of a lower threshold than you normally would like because of the controls relying on approved and total charges for its triggering. There is another alert, and it's called a resource utilization alert. I don't see it used very often because it's more of a gross alert that sends out to all the management. So it's sort of a one-time setup. It has limited controls on what you can include and exclude in the alert. But really what the utilization alert is meant to do is meant to identify resources that are scheduled through bookings. So it is attached to the bookings process, the resource module process, scheduled according to a threshold or higher. So if somebody is scheduled for more than, for example, 100% of their time, or 130% of their time, or 150% of their time, they would be included in this alert, which is sent out to the named manager of those people on their record. So there is a very specific specific function associated to the resource utilization. You can't really control who else gets it. It just goes to the manager of the person that's included in the report. And it does just look at percentage schedule. So this alert tends not to fall nicely into a lot of customers' setup because they may be scheduling people at 150, 160 because they double book somebody on PTO and work, and they still have to resolve it, but they don't want the utilization alert to go out. So it is a very general alert. If you look at how it's configured, if you've ever wondered what it looks like. It's meant to run daily, and you basically just set a threshold. You can't control what users to include. You can't control what managers to get it. So it really is configured to run a certain way, which in some cases may actually be something that you can consider because you've been wondering about this. But in other situations, it may just not really apply because your line manager may be different than your project manager or your functional manager. So the person who would get the alert would not necessarily be the person to take action. So I don't see this alert used as often, but it is available in the system, and it's minimal configuration. Now, that's pretty much it for the alert. So the missing timesheet missing timesheet alert is a good one. The overdue timesheet approval and expense approval is a good one. The project budgets is going to really be up to your PMs if they want to take advantage of that functionality, if it's going to be helpful for them. And the resource utilization alert is really sort of a very unique situation that you would probably need to use it if you wanted to. But another set of emails or communications coming out of OpenAir are just your standard notifications, right? These are, hey, this has happened, or hey, you need to take action, right? And so this could be a lot of stuff. This is a lot of stuff that comes out of the system. So a lot of workflow related emails in OpenAir. You guys know about the timesheet approval, open, submitted, approved, rejected, expense approval, open, submitted, approved, rejected. You may have invoice approval. If you have revenue containers, you can have approvals for those. You can have booking requests, bookings approvals. Like there's just a lot of approval workflow functionality in OpenAir. And of course, any one of those that you implement will have an email communication. That's standard notification to communicate out to, hey, you have something ready for your approval. Hey, it's been approved or rejected. Likewise, there's the informational email side of the communication plan, which is, hey, a project's been created. You're now the owner. Hey, this project's been moved to this other stage. Hey, we've changed, updated a booking. This is some of those checkboxes that you may find if you work with projects on the project properties page, where you have update everyone when a task changes, update everyone when the issue changes. So these are all informational emails. So the configuration of these notifications, of the informational email notifications, are in various places of the system. As we get farther down in the presentation here, you'll see that some of those informational email checkbox options have sort of been consolidated with new functionality like the notifications function that we'll touch on at the end of the presentation. So if I think about workflow notifications, you definitely need workflow notifications to some extent because you need to tell people when there's something they need to do. So an invoice is ready for your approval. So that email is very useful, I think, to make sure that people get that email. But there's also consideration of, if there's an approval action required, what if you have to have someone proxy in to do that approval? So there's been a lot of functionality added over the years to include what's considered a proxy owner, proxy notifications. So there's functionality, and a lot of it's embedded in the new notification feature that's been enhanced in the April release. So that not only is the person who was originally intended to be the sign-off person or the approver, it could also be a person that's set up to proxy as that person, or that took proxy action on behalf of that person. So the workflow notifications are a necessary email communication to let people know action is required. Now, it's one thing to get an email saying that you need to take action. Okay? It's another to get an email that says action was done. Okay? And this is where the approval part of the workflow comes in. It's like, hey, your timesheet's been approved. I have this conversation occasionally with customers about the usefulness of that email, like the fact that an employee of mine gets an email from me that says your timesheet's been approved. Do they do anything with that information? Is that important to them? Obviously if I reject it, they have to take action on it because there's some reason why the rejection happens, and so that email is expected. But the approval, I would, and this is my opinion, I would venture to guess that 99% of your people just delete it. They don't even bother reading it. They know that their timesheet's approved, of course. That's fine. If there was a problem, you would know about it. The only time that I think the timesheet approval email is useful, I think, is for people who are more like the subcontractor type folks in your organization, where the approval of the timesheet actually means that that time can now be billed to that to that customer that you're working on. So that's the place where I think the timesheet approval email is useful. So if you don't need it, turn it off. It is actually something you can turn off in the system. And then you can use some of the notification functionality to just send it to those exception people who are subcontractors, for example, so that you clean up a little bit of the email traffic that's coming from OpenAir. Now as it comes to approval processes, I thought I would take a minute, since we're talking about communication and routing of information. Approval processes themselves drive a lot of the emails, right? Like who gets the email, when do they get it, who is it next in the chain of email notification. So there are a lot of functions associated to the feature called approval processes in OpenAir. When you look at like the user record or the project right here, you see approver as a drop-down, and you can pick a name of a person, or you can pick like project manager or project owner, and those are relative terms in the system. But then you can also define approval processes, and those are a much more robust feature. If you're not taking advantage of these, I can listen to the next few slides, because I think you'll find some features that you may have been thinking about. I really wish OpenAir could do this, and it actually can. So some of the controls that are available in the approval processes are, what if the person who is submitting the object is also the approver of the object? Does that matter so much on timesheets when it's the project manager submitting time against their own project? Maybe not. But what about expense reports? Do you have a policy that a project manager can't approve their own expense reports, basically saying it's okay for me to spend this much money taking everyone out for dinner? So you may have a situation where the approver is actually different than the submitter, even though the approver is the one that typically would be the approver. So there is alternate approval person configuration in an approval process. Whew, tongue-tied. Okay. There's also the ability to do escalations if there's lack of action, right? So obviously the emails are meant to have action be taken, but if action is not taken, there's also some functionality that can route it to others to take action. And then there's auto-approve criteria that you may not be as familiar with. So the approver versus equal to the submitter auto-approval function, this is really simply the case of, and I'm going to go into this approval process configuration because it's a little hard to see when you do a screenshot. So here's your standard approval process. And what you do is you basically identify a sequence of approvers that have to happen, that you want to be involved. It doesn't have to be more than one person. It can be just one person. One of the kind of a maintenance best practice that we recommend to customers is that if you have a named person that should be signing off on everyone's timesheet or everyone's expense report, or maybe it's a department head or something, set up an approval process anyway and use that as a default on your projects, because if you're like 90% of the companies in the world, people change, staff changes, people change positions, they come and they go, and all you would have to do is come in here and swap a name of a person out on an approval process versus having to update the 75 projects that you put their hard-coded name on as the timesheet approver. So approval process is a useful maintenance tool in that respect. But as you see, like the approver here, the approver of, when an expense report is submitted, the manager signs off on it. But if it's the manager actually submitting the expense report, you could have something like it would be the manager's manager, right? So the person who is that manager reports to would sign off on it. So this is how it would do an automatic reroute based on the fact that it knows who you are when you submit it. So of course it's not going to auto-approve the fact that you did the work. The other is the auto-approval rules. I find this useful in a couple of situations. One, for total hours, like if somebody's working a lot of hours on a timesheet, maybe you want to have that be a secondary approval by the line manager so that they're very much made aware that the person is working a lot of hours, like a lot of hours. Another is, in many cases you may have an expense policy where people at certain levels have only sign off to certain dollar amounts. So a PM can sign off on up to $2,500. Maybe after that it has to be the department head. At $10,000, after that it has to be accounts payable. Okay, that kind of routing actually can happen within the approval process, and what you use is auto approval rules in the tool. So the auto approval rules are what you hang off of each of the rows. And what you need to do is you need to, for each person that is an approver, if that person does not always have to sign off, that's the row that you put the auto approval rule on. So in this case, Mark, that's on this row here, if he doesn't necessarily have to sign off if it's less than $100, then I would create an auto approval rule that says automatically approve the expense if the total value is less than $100. And once I do that, it'll always go to this first line, but then it'll auto approve on behalf of Mark if the expense report is less than $100, for example. And so this way you can chain people together according to their thresholds of approval in the system. And the last one, which I don't think enough customers take advantage of this feature, and some of it is dependent on if you have sort of the line item rejection feature. If you have the line item rejection feature with timesheets, this doesn't really work very well. But if you keep your timesheet whole and just have it go through the approval processes, there is a way to sort of escalate. I kind of think of it as an escalation routing. And that's where you can actually have it reroute the approval. Like I route it to Jody on Monday, but Jody doesn't take action for 2 days. So if Jody doesn't take action, I route it to Jimmy. Okay, so Jody and Jimmy now have the option to approve it. So it's sort of a way to set up a backup approver, somebody that can be more of like an ops manager or something that could approve timesheets that are being held up because the person who is supposed to sign off is actually not responding quick enough, perhaps. Now, if you're wondering how that shows up, it doesn't natively show up on the form. Okay. If you look at the screenshot that I did, there's a little after days field. And if you look at inside the tool, when you open up, if you're following along inside OpenAir while you're listening, the number of days does not show up natively. In order to have it actually show up, what you need to do is you need to identify 2 rows that have the same sequence number. So they have to be the same sequence number. And then you have to check the box down here that says, and only one of those is necessary to approve it. The minute you do that 2-step action, you'll see that the assign after number of days will show up. And so now you've basically set the stage for me to say, if the manager doesn't take action after 2 days, trying to click into here to make the edit. If the manager doesn't take action after 2 days, then it will route automatically to Mark in this case. Okay, so it sends it to the manager, and after 2 days, it'll reassign it to Mark. And so either one of those people can take action on it at that point in time. But obviously, if the secondary person gets the email, they should at least be aware that when they get the email, obviously that there's a lag in approvals happening in the tool. So yet another communication option. Okay. Now, as we talk about timesheet approvals, that's one of the fastest generating email pieces of traffic in the tool, right? The fact that there's timesheets ready for approval and the timesheets approved and rejected. So lots of emails coming in. And I do hear the complaint often that I'm getting too many emails. Like, why am I getting 17 emails for the same timesheet? And actually, why am I having to approve the same timesheet over and over and over again? Okay, and there's a few reasons for that based on the configuration that you have in your tool. So in general, when we deal with timesheets in the system, especially if you're recording time to the project, which a large majority of customers do, the timesheet itself is routed based on, and the expense reports too, but I'm using timesheets for my example. The timesheet is routed based on who is named as an approver on the project first. So let's say the person's timesheet has 3 different projects on it. 2 of the projects are managed by project manager number 1, and 1 is managed by project number 2. So when that person submits their timesheet, it's going to get routed to each of those project managers to sign off on the project management time. Once it gets past the project manager level, it's going to route to the manager of the person perhaps, because that might be at the user level. Okay? The user level may have an additional approval on it. So what happens is it routes to everyone that needs to be identified at the project level, and then it looks at the user's records and says, does anyone else need to know about it? And many times I see a two-step sign-off, project manager at the project level, manager at the user level. Not always, but it's a typical configuration that's put out there. Okay. So if you happen to be the manager and you're the project manager as well, sometimes the system will, actually the system is smart enough to know that you already approved it one time around. However, in the case of, like, let's say you're the person's manager and you're also project manager number one, you will actually see this timesheet twice. The first time you'll see it because you're the manager of two of those projects. The second time you'll see it because you get to see the whole timesheet, because the third project was not something that you had already signed off on. So you will see the timesheet twice in the sign-off. And there's some configuration considerations that you can work on to try to avoid some of the duplication. Okay. Really, the comment here is, if you're looking at why am I getting all these emails, is really understanding the fact that the system will look at the project level first and then look at the user. If you are taking care of everything at the project level, the person and the manager at the project level, there is no need for you to set anything at the user level. That can be a self-approver. That doesn't mean the person self-approves timesheet. It just means that the approval is all controlled at the project level. Okay, and that's a pretty common configuration as well. So project has all of the approvals. The user has a self-approval kind of configuration. Now, the one example I gave about having the same timesheet, having to approve it twice, was I'm the person's manager, but I'm also like the project manager for a couple projects. And I know that situation happens. That can't be avoided if you want that two-tier approval process, because you need if you set it at the user level, the whole timesheet has to be seen by the manager. Okay. But some other things that you can think about is there's also a situation that if you are only allowed to see a single project at a time on a timesheet for approval, which is a configuration control in the system. If I bring up a timesheet and I view it and I can only see the project that I'm supposed to be approving right now, and I hit approve, but there's another project on that timesheet that I'm also responsible for. Once I hit approve, it's going to come back up again and give me the second project and the third project and so forth. So you actually would be looking at pieces of the timesheet every time you hit the approve button. So there is actually a switch inside the role that says project approvers can view all timesheets. It's also in the timesheet settings. Project reviewers can view all time entries. If you turn that switch on, that will solve the problem of the fact that if you're responsible for 3 projects, you get to see all the projects at the same time. You hit the approve button for them all at the same time. If you are only allowed to see one project at a time, you will have to actually hit the approve button 3 times. So that's the sort of trade-off there. If there is concern obviously about viewing the whole timesheet or data viewing by a person, then that trade-off is something that you'll have to consider as far as the number of approvals necessary. Okay, oops. And the other is really the system does try to minimize the number of, let's see, do I have it on this next one here? No, okay. The system does try to minimize the number of times that you do have to do the approvals and the number of messages regarding approval. It does. In the situation where if I've already signed off on everything from a project level, then it tries to route it to me again as the manager, and I happen to actually already have touched everything from a project level, it will auto-approve on my behalf because it knows I've already touched everything. It's just going to show me the same timesheet again. So it will do some auto-approval. If you read the messages that are in the approval history, it'll be able to tell you why it did the auto-approval, because you had already touched it previously, for example. So it does try to do that. Now, as far as the number of notifications, so I get this a lot. So I'm responsible for 3 projects on this person's timesheet. Why am I getting 3 emails? That is because those are all independently sent. So you will actually get 3 emails. If you are named as the person on the user record to sign up on timesheets, you would just get 1 email. But if you have project level approval, you will get 1 email for every project that's on that timesheet that you're responsible for. So it does add a lot to the inbox. I realize that. It's just the way the controls are for the routing. So that's the workflow emails, right? The submission, the action required. Consider maybe turning off the approval version of those emails because they may not be as beneficial. The rejection, of course, you'll need to keep. But then there's a whole slew of informational emails that can come out, like something's created, something's modified, something's maybe closed. For example, like issues are closed. It's an issue notification. What's the intent of an informational notification? You really want to enforce process, or you want action to still be required in some way, right? But to be honest, I think a lot of informational notifications are just that. They're noise and informational. So if it's meant to sort of make sure that everyone's aware, then it's useful. If it's just something that you turned on because you thought it would be helpful and people are ignoring it, then obviously it's not useful. So those are the type of things that I would scrub to see which of those can you just turn off and maybe replace with reports, for example. So there's some standard informational emails that are available in the tool, like when the project moves between stages, that's a project stage configuration that's available. When bookings are entered, there's controls in the resource settings in the administration module, whether a manager or the resource gets notified. There's task assignment controls at the project properties form. There's issue assignment and controls at the project properties form. These are all things that have been in the tool for a long time. A lot of that sort of being replaced by new functionality called notifications, which we'll get into in just a second. Okay. All of the informational emails that are available from those various areas, project stage, resource settings, project properties, they have a standard format. They have a standard name or subject line. They have standard content. But you can actually control the content of even those standard emails. And the feature that was introduced a few years back to be able to enhance those communications was called email templates. So they're still available in the tool. The email template is a way that you can, and it's over here in the global settings. The email templates are a way that you can sort of build out the body of the notification, like make it useful, okay, versus the standard wording that comes out. If you're using like issue tracking in the system, make sure that it has something that requires an action, perhaps, for the project manager to do something with issues. And the email templates are all available based on what type of object you're talking about. So some of these are workflow related. Some of these are just informational, like the project moved from one stage to another, okay, or the project was updated. But the thing about the email templates is they're just that. They're just a template, and they have limited actions that they respond to. So like this survey trigger, the template only triggers if a new project owner is set on an existing project, right? So some of these controls may be something that don't really apply to your process. If they apply, great, you can use them. But this would almost drive a process of, in order to get this survey trigger to come out, I have to make sure I assign it to the person who's responsible for doing the survey as part of my project closeout procedure, right? So you end up sort of having to define process to align with the functionality in the tool. Not something that I typically look at. I like to say the tool has to support the process. But in the case of email templates, there's only certain ways that the templates actually can be used or triggered to run in the tool. And so you're sort of limited based on the fact that it has that built-in capability. So you have to kind of look at them to see if they're going to be useful for you or not. There are a number of templates available. I just kind of showed you in the tool, but based on the types of objects that can send emails natively today in the tool, authorizations, invoices, projects, tasks, so forth. So if you set up a template, the template replaces whatever the standard email is that OpenAir would be sending. So it basically references your template as the content of the email to send out. Now, the downside of using the template, though, is other than the fact that the technology, like the feature functionality, is limited to how it was initially built a number of years ago. If you don't use a template, the standard email will be used. If you want to use a template, you can't customize it to only send to certain people, for example. So you can't really sort of conditionally set up a template. It's either you set up a template and use it all the time based on the way that template is going to get triggered, or use a standard email, right? So you can't do a lot of customizations with the email templates in the tool. However, there is a new feature. Well, I shouldn't say new. It's been around for a couple of years now. But it's called customized notifications. So this is where I think the product is going, and this is my opinion only, because a lot of where the notification controls are that were scattered throughout the tool are now being consolidated into this notification configuration area in the modules in the administration section of the tool. So these are called customized notifications, and they came out probably about 3 years ago now, 4 years ago, and have been enhanced even as recently as April. So this is a nice way to enhance the communication that's coming out of OpenAir, because the big thing about customized notifications is not only can you customize the content, you can customize the receivers, and you can now conditionally control when it triggers. So there's just a whole robust feature set here that can control your communication plan. For those of you who have been following us for a number of years on webinars, we did do this presentation back in 2011 before some of these enhancements were available. So now there's just a bigger focus on this notification feature that I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about now. So what can be accomplished with a customized notification? And this is where you really can sort of let your mind go free. So you can set up notifications. You give them a name now. They used to be something that you would sort of set up one and done. You can give them a name, and then you can set up the conditions that would trigger when those notifications go out. Once you set that up, then you can identify who's going to get it. And you can even identify external people to get it, so external emails that are not necessarily OpenAir users. You can put the content of the email. Some of the content can actually be links back into the tool, so of course you'd have to have access to OpenAir for those. So there's just a lot you can do here. Okay, so it's sort of like let your mind go free, but you want to also keep in mind what's going to be effective to get out the door to people. So I'm going to flip into the tool here and kind of talk a little bit more about this specific feature. The notifications functionality, it actually can live side by side with standard email. So there is the support team at NetSuite is very good at sort of clarifying with you, hey, do you want these to live side by side, or do you want to turn off the standard emails and replace it with what you're going to do with notifications? Because there is a whole slew of notification controls. Okay, and this is just the list that I'm seeing here under the global create. This is just because I'm in the resources notification configuration. So these are all the email controls I can do with the resources notifications. If I turned it on, I can turn on notifications per module. So I can turn them on for timesheets, I can turn them on for projects, and they would have their own set of email controls here. So the general rule of thumb is if you turn on the notification feature in a module, you tend to turn off all of the standard emails, which also, by the way, turns off email templates. Okay? You can still create email templates, they just won't do anything because the standard email controls will be turned off. But the notification functionality starts off with basically you give it a name. Okay, come on, open up. Okay. You can give the notification a name. Okay, if you don't give it a name, it defaults it. And then you have, this was the big enhancement in the April release for those of you who have been using the tool for a while. So previously there was a limitation on what you could do as far as conditions. It would be basically proxy by, client project, and maybe date or some. So it's a very basic set of controls. Now it's quite a long list of things that are relative to what it is that you're trying to notify. This is in the bookings module for bookings, booking requested, so what makes sense from a booking perspective. Okay. Is every field available here? No. So you will have to kind of look at, see based on the notification that you want to send if the field that you want to key off of, like a custom field or something, is available. But a large majority of fields are available now, which makes the functionality more appealing because now you can limit it to only send to maybe certain, like the timesheet approval, right? Only send it to subcontractors versus everyone in the company. Okay. So not only can you do that condition on when it sends out, right, but then you also have the ability to identify who gets it. Okay, so this is where you can send, CC copies to a project manager when maybe time off is requested. You could send it to a proxy by. There's a lot of proxy options if you look at the timesheet version of this and expenser version of this. So you're CCing people on this. This is also how you can, previously, before the notification feature, if you wanted to CC someone as an FYI, you had to sort of include them in the approval process, but tell them you shouldn't actually approve it. You're just going to get the email that says something got submitted. So now the notification feature allows you to say, when it's submitted, notify this person. So they don't have to take action. They just know that it's been submitted, for example. Below the selection of the people in the tool, you have who else can get it. So you can actually add additional people who are not OpenAir users. So this can go outside of the chain. So of course you want to be careful with that, but you can put as many emails here that you want. And then the message is whatever you want to set the message up to be. It has a field cut paste option. So basically if you wanted to add something like the link to the web page, you could paste it in there and it would include that into the message. You can turn these on and off now. That was another enhancement that came out in the April release. But this does add a whole other dimension to controlling the communications in OpenAir. Those of you who have had the tool for a long time, people are sort of used to the emails you're getting. But this gives you an opportunity to sort of go through and do like a version 2.0 launch of the communication plan if you ever care to. Right. So of course I always like to this is just me recapping that even as late as April of this year, when the release came out for OpenAir, they have continued to enhance this part of the tool. So if you haven't taken a look at it, I would recommend taking a look at it. Okay. So then I always want to give some examples for folks to think about. Hey, notify HR when time off is taken from a timesheet. They may not be involved in the approval process, but they need to know when it's taken. And it could be when the timesheet is submitted, for example, or when leave accrual is created, or leave accrual transaction is created. Or what if a resource schedule has been changed? Typically, if you use the standard emails, the requester is the one that would get the notification. But in this case, we can actually just include whoever the project manager is of the project to get notified. They don't have to actually be the requester, because that previous restriction with the requester sort of drove the need for the PMs to actually be the ones to put the bookings or the booking requests in when there could have been a centralized resource management team. Right? So now the notification feature allows us to sort of focus the notification to the right person versus forcing a process to happen that's not natural for the organization. And then the last type of communication, and I don't want to, this is definitely an important one, but is actually the reports, scheduling reports, right? That is a form of communication. You want data out of the tool. You want to be able to act on data in the tool. It could be something like the month-end reports. It could be the missing timesheet, the naughty list that gets emailed out to everyone. So scheduling reports to run and email the results is still equally valid as a communication device in the tool. And so you want to be a little bit limited on what you do as far as which reports you send out to people and how often you send them out. So you have to, in order for you to schedule reports to run, you have to own the report. Okay? So you own the report, and then you can use the schedule icon to schedule it to run. There's just two things that I'm going to highlight here that have changed over time. Right? One hasn't changed and one has changed. So the one recommendation that has not changed for me is if you are sharing the report with everyone in your company, I really strongly recommend don't send it on a weekly basis or a daily basis to everyone in the company. That will just be a lot of email traffic that will get ignored. And everyone will learn who you are very quickly. So if you share it with folks, just be cognizant of the fact that if you do schedule it and you want them also to receive it, that you coordinate with them so that they do expect to get a file every Monday or every Tuesday or every day from the tool. The other thing is that up until about a year ago, okay, in the May 2014 release, there was no way to find out which reports were actually scheduled in the tool. So you would schedule it, and then maybe that person left the company and you still keep getting this report even though they're no longer even in the company. That's all been resolved. So if you're not aware of it, there's administrators have access to the status tab now in the reports module. That status tab is really, really proving to be a helpful addition to the product. And one of the primary reasons is when you click in the status tab, you actually can see from which let's see, let's get it over here, scheduled. You can actually see what reports are scheduled to run when. And now you can actually locate those, and you as an administrator now can edit other people's reports, so you can remove that schedule control and stop it from running on a regular basis. So there's some administration enhancements in the tool to prevent all of those lost scheduled reports from going out, so you can take control of your destiny. So to wrap up, we're going to talk a little bit about the approaches that we recommend when it comes to doing a communication plan with OpenAir. Is setting up a communication matrix. Take the time to figure out who needs to know what. Okay, it's really just a spreadsheet, but at the end of the day it will prove helpful, and it will help you map out what notifications you should activate in the system, what can you turn off that's not very useful. Figure out how often you need to be notified, especially when it comes to alerts like the timesheet compliance, what makes sense within the organization. And then it's really a matter of looking at those customized notifications, I think, because that functionality is really going to be able to control the receipt of emails that are important to certain individuals and not important to others. So here's an example of a matrix that we've used before, where basically let's hit the high level of the things that we want the system to notify you on. What are the different roles in the organization? When do they get it? Do they get it? Okay. And then are there any controls over like money amounts or check boxes being enabled, things like that in the tool, where the customization feature can come into play. So basically, consider the fact that the tool is there to support your business. The tool is there to help people take action when action is needed, to keep people informed, and to confirm actions have been completed. Right? It's meant to help you drive your business and help you run your business. What you don't want is a bunch of emails that are just, people are like, oh God, I got another email from OpenAir. So you really want emails to be useful, and it may be worth the exercise to go through and say, which of these things can I clean up so that I'm using the tool effectively as a communication method within my organization. So what I'm going to